So, and to me, just as a working definition, I was thinking about this like in terms of awakening, and I know that you use the term awakening. For me, awakening is a state of coming back into alignment with what is. That's all it means. It's not enlightenment, it's not some higher state. It's being able to sit with what actually is and not have aversions and not make up stories and just being skillful and being able to just be in what life is. Because life is kind of gnarly, you know?
Welcome to Conversation for the Soul. I'm Linda Christine. Today, I had the absolute honor of speaking with Sadee Whip. This here's her description on her profile. An online community for witches, healers, and other strange creatures. Now you're thinking things are really crazy and a little bit woo-woo. And maybe they are, but in a very intellectual yet down-to-earth way. Sadee is the author of Savage Awakening, and our conversation today breaks a lot of the norms of the spiritual community, but with such deep groundedness. I'm not doing it justice. I really hope you listen to this podcast because Sadee is an amazing human. Something she has grown into is her humanness. Inside joke, you're going to have to watch. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And without further ado, here is Miss Sadee. Welcome, Sadee. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm really good. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
You are a beautiful newfound discovery for me. A friend of mine, Chris Aguilera, made a post about you, and I read it, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to see that book right now.
Nice. Lovely.
So it was such a beautiful flow into finding you, and I'm excited to get to know you. So
Good.
let's start at the beginning or beginnings. How
Okay.
many awakenings have you had?
So what do you mean by awakenings?
Okay, what spurred your expansion in this lifetime to become the person that you are now? Were you born this way,
I
or
was born
was there
this way.
something? Okay, that's
Yeah.
cool. That's super
Yeah.
cool.
I was a pretty weird little kid. And one of the things with the path that I walk is that there's kind of this concept of people are sort of marked as different from usually from birth or the time that they're born. And whether it's a physical abnormality or certain personality characteristics, you often see like neurodivergent people or people with just certain like very strong characteristics that you can tell they're a little weird. And in sort of indigenous communities all over the world, there would always be somebody who could recognize those children and maybe take them in and guide them. But in the Western world, we don't have that anymore. And we've lost our connection to our own indigenous roots and stuff. So a lot of us have just been free floating, trying to kind of find our own way. And I was fortunate that I grew up on a ranch about 6.5 miles outside of town, and we were very poor growing up. So I was a latchkey kid. So I had a lot of time alone, and I spent that out roaming, several thousand acres unsupervised. So nature and my dreams were my primary teachers. I've always had what we might call spirit communication. And then I had my mom said when I was 2, I started to spontaneously give massages. She doesn't know where I got that from. And by the time I was 4, I had my first healing experience with a spider, and things just kind of flowed from there.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
So at what point did you start to define what was happening to you,
I
or
was
did you just
7.
get messages on that?
No, I was 7. I remember exactly what happened. So I was playing outside, and my mom and her sister and brother were doing their adult thing, having a kind of conversation. I don't know what they were talking about, but they were in the dirt driveway having a conversation. And I remember very distinctly having a very physical sensation of, there's cows grazing in the field. There's a little butterfly floating by. It's early summer. There's the crabapple tree starting to produce some crabapple babies. And I just had a very distinct physical sensation that they were not a part of what all of the rest of us were a part of. and it was very pronounced, and it was my first conscious realization, but it explained something that had always felt uncomfortable in my body, was that humans, especially adult humans, but that humans are doing something different than all of the rest of us, all of the rest of the world. And I took a vow then and there to figure out why humans were so disconnected, because I connected it to a lot of misery and a lot of pain that they caused as a result of feeling disconnected or living in a separate reality. So it was a very, for a 7-year-old, it was in a 7-year-old context. It was a very profound moment for me. And I remember standing right there, and I took a vow to this path. And so I just really dove in to all things human, to just studying humans as much as I could and figuring out, like, where's the missing link? What's going on? How can I help them get connected again?
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, Sadee has a book, which I just ordered and have not been able to read yet, but the little bit that I dove into is great. And this is perhaps in the book, but you refer to those, your brother and your mom, as humans. What do you refer to yourself as?
Nowadays, I say human. My mom tells this story. I don't remember this. She said, but when I was a little kid, I would always talk about the humans. And one day my mom looked at me and she goes, honey, you know that you're human too, right? And I just got this look on my face and turned around and walked away. So I don't think that I'm something else. I think that I'm more maybe rooted. I'm sort of like, as much as a Western person can be a little bit more how humans should be, rather than these kind of false self-concepts. And I'm not talking about ego. I mean, so in the book, I talk about something called the field of denial. And the field of denial is essentially a kind of what I call a realm being. It's sort of a living conscious field that serves the purpose of insulating humans from chaos and uncertainty and the existential crises of being tiny creatures in a vast universe, right? And that sort of went out of control, where humans got a little crazy with it. And it's turned into denial of the body, denial of the earth is sacred, denial of nature, a lot of power trips, a lot of overlording, a lot of, disdain for the body and separation of the body and the spirit, and like the spirit's higher, the body's lower, just all of these kind of kooky things that Western society has done. And all of them, no matter where you look at, you can see this thread of, like, it's all denying that we are tiny and a part of the cycle of life, rather than somehow superior or outside of or in control of. And I think, benefit of the doubt is that it's an unconscious, very deep existential terror that we carry. Worst case scenario, humans are jerks. But I don't really feel that misanthropic anymore. I really love people one-on-one. It's just en masse, we've kind of made a big mess, So I call that big mess the field of denial. So, and to me, just as a working definition, I was thinking about this, like, in terms of awakening, and I know that you use the term awakening. For me, awakening is a state of coming back into alignment with what is. That's all it means. It's not enlightenment. It's not some higher state. It's being able to sit with what actually is and not have aversions and not make up stories, and just being skillful and being able to just be in what life is, because life is kind of gnarly,
Yeah. Oh, that's such a beautiful definition of it. And that
Thanks.
feels so resonant for me.
Mm.
You have a very, very indigenous Earth Mother feel to your energy. Does that resonate for you, or how do you define your energy, so to speak? And I'm asking this because I'm curious what your thoughts are about going-ons off planet. If there are any, what do you feel about other ET races, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Okay, so that's a big question. There's some big chunks in there. I appreciate that. Like, ooh, that's intriguing.
Unpack it however you want.
Yeah. Totally. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would say that I was very uninterrupted in my development. So I didn't have humans getting in the way of what the wind and trees and all of the beings around me were and how they were informing my awareness. And my mom is, I grew up with a mom who in the 70s would separated her plants not according to the light that they needed, but according to the music that they liked. And she was always, they all had names, and she's always cooing at them and talking to them. And I have a very conservative, Trump voting, just very like my mom. But she's always been very connected to nature. She grew up out on a ranch as well. So she calls us dirt people. When I left the city and moved back out to the country, she was so relieved because, honey, we're dirt people. So my mom and my whole family, it's very, very close to the earth, working with the earth. But it was horses and cows and agriculture rather than spirituality or a spiritual perspective. So, but I was just left alone, and no one was telling me that what I was experiencing wasn't real. And my mom was very much like, I want to support you as much as I can to pursue your interests, and I want to stay out of the way of influencing you with my ideals so you can figure out who you're becoming and what's happening for you, which I think is for any parent is incredibly progressive and like kind of amazing to do that, right? Yeah. So when I started doing energy work on people, my mom would have like a dinner party or a cocktail party, and people would come over and someone would have a headache, and she'd go, "Oh, honey, come do your headache thing." And I would just crawl up behind them on the couch, sit on the top of the couch, and I'd put my hands around their head and I'd pull their headache out. And then I would say, "Don't tell me where your headache is." And then I'd pull their headache out, and then I would get it because I didn't know to not use my own body. I would get it somewhere in my head, and I would tell them where their headache was, and they go, "That's exactly where it was." And then within 5 minutes, their headache would be gone. Party trick over. And no one ever said she shouldn't be doing that or that's really weird. It was kind of bizarre that because a lot of people, especially I was in a little tiny town, it was a very Christian little tiny white town. So a lot of people could have said that's a problem that she's doing that, and no one ever did, which I find just so interesting, So to the alien question, I hope that it answers.
Oh yeah.
Okay. To the alien question, I don't know. I have no idea. I've seen UFOs very clearly. I was in a car with 3 other people. We all saw the same thing. I've seen UFOs. I've had it substantiated just from other witnesses. Unidentified, I don't know what it was, defies the laws of physics, especially what I knew of physics back then, which was limited. I would imagine that any life anywhere else, it's governed by the same deep intelligence that all life is governed by, and it would just be its variation on the theme of that deep intelligence. I can't imagine it would be, unless it had its own kind of version of a field of denial, I can't imagine that it would be too alien or foreign to any other life form. I mean, we're all governed by, in my opinion, we're all governed by the same deep intelligence that is more ancient than any of us can fathom. And, and I'm sure it's just expressing itself in all the ways that it uses whatever. So if it's like, not a carbon-based life form, if it's some other type of life form, it will express its same intelligence through that life form in whatever iteration it shows up as. And I think if we remain curious and rooted to that deeper intelligence, it wouldn't be a scary experience necessarily. That's what communicational lies in, being rooted, not in being smart up here, but in being rooted. Other life forms can feel that rootedness in us. So yeah, I don't know about aliens. If I was an alien, I don't think I would come here. I would come for the flora and fauna, but I don't think I would come for the dominant species on the planet,
I was just curious because you do seem so earthy and very connected in that way. And a lot of people in the community identify with Palladians or identify with Venetians and
right.
So I was just curious where you were.
I'm happy being here. I'm happy being of this earth, and it's such an incredibly rich and mind-blowing experience to just be alive. That, I mean, when I was a little kid, admittedly, I would stand outside and pray for whatever dropped me off here to come pick me up, because I really struggled with humans for a very long time. Really, really struggled. I find the field of denial, sort of Western human culture, extraordinarily confusing and disconcerting. But not because I'm an alien, Pleiadian, Atlantean or something, but because I'm a part of the cycle of life that the human created realm does not honor. I think that's more why.
Absolutely, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I feel that because when I was a kid, 90% of my time was outdoors, and it was like my dog was my best friend,
Yeah, yeah,
and the whole backyard was,
yeah,
my world. And
yeah.
yeah, all
It's a
the other
rich world,
stuff
right?
was just like it just sickened me to have to deal with all of it.
Yeah, right. It's just, I
Yeah.
think so. It's like simple and honest versus convoluted and bizarre and made up. And just the tension of having to navigate that. It's not clear. It's a fairly disorienting experience when these sort of arbitrary behavioral rules and codes of conduct and frames of reference for morality and stuff are top down versus arising as a responsiveness to the lives around us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just kind of
absolutely.
bizarre. And I think a lot of children around the age of 6 start kind of losing their connection with that natural, they start getting sort of conditioned out of it. So I have a lot of clients who will bring their young children to figure out how to help them retain that deeper connection as they start getting into the school system and start getting more involved in society, to kind of keep their magic, if you want to say it that way. Where did you grow up, if you don't mind my asking?
Illinois. I'm
Oh,
Midwest. Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, and I'm a Florida girl now. Been here longer than anywhere else. I've traveled all over the place. But yeah, I'm anchored in Florida.
Nice.
It's the only place I've been where I feel like I'm home. I
How
haven't been
interesting.
able to call any place else I've lived home.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt that
Yeah.
way in Nepal when I lived in Nepal for a few months and I wanted to, they have very strict regulations on being able to come into the country and live there. But yeah, I felt that way at that first time. I know what that feeling is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
It's
that's lovely. Congratulations.
so thank you, thank
Yeah.
you. The healing that you do, and
Mhm.
this is what I'm finding so fascinating as I'm on my own healing my vessel journey that I have been
Mhm.
on. It's funny, the older I get, the more I want to be healthier.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I should appreciate it.
all these issues that the physical body's having are all issues that we didn't have 100 years ago,
Mm.
because we're having issues from this fake light that we sit in all day
Yeah.
and these unnatural foods that we're eating. um what kinds of things are you seeing cropping up that are just like, wow, this is really distorted?
In terms of just physical conditions or
Physical or I'm sure it translates to mental too, because it
absolutely.
all works together in the spirit as
Yeah.
well.
I think I think that we're inundated by toxins for sure. I think the biggest breakdown is where the sort of cultural hyperindependence um, intersects with the reality of people being ill because of lack of support and lack of respect for the environment is taking a toll on their entire system, psychologically, energetically, physically, spiritually. And I think the real breakdown is the intersection where when somebody starts to feel unwell, we have this kind of social narrative that it's sort of your problem. And there becomes this sort of very subtle escalating isolation and very subtle escalating judgment and very subtle withdrawal of, I think communities should double down around people who are not well. Communities should really be drawn in. And I think people start to kind of subtly get put off. And I think we're fairly inept with one another in terms of communal help and communal support. I think we don't really know how to do that well. It doesn't like people don't have basic concepts of like, I could find out if you have food restrictions and what you like to eat and just make some pre-made frozen meals to take the burden off food prep for you, especially if you have any kind of autoimmune thing or any kind of food sensitivity thing or whatever, just to make it easier for you. Or I could come over and do some laundry, or I could offer to pick up groceries. It's like we don't have these things occur to us. So as you have a person who's getting increasingly depleted and increasingly having to expend their the energy that they have available for their day just on tending to themselves, just trying to not get worse, right? And then not being helped. I think that's actually the most insidious thing that I'm seeing happening in any kind of illness in our culture. And then as far as, the physical ailments, I mean, I think there are those of us who are canaries in the coal mine. And you see the people that I was just reading a thing about genetics, and there's a particular gene that we have that can be certain people are born with that makes you more sensitive to chemical and environmental disruptions. So people who are now chemically very sensitive, the author posits that that actually served communities to have a few individuals who could go into an area and smell the air or taste something and a teeny amount and be able to discern that it was actually really bad for us. So I think that there's also a genetic component of kind of the way that the ecosystem plays out through our bodies is it's sending the alarm through some of us to the broader human community, but the broader human community doesn't know how to listen to that alarm. So we think you're just getting sick. What haven't you processed? What haven't you done? Rather than you're getting sick. What are we doing to the environment that's causing you to get sick? We need to listen to these messages that we're getting. So it's not enough that we have, forest devastation and climate change and all these things. It's now beginning to creep into our own species, and our own species is going, chronic illness, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, multiple allergies. People's bodies are just screaming that we're out of balance with the environment. People are like, you should process your issues with your mom and really think about that and go into therapy and like do chelation. And it's always like, you need to solve your problem rather than we need to listen to these sensitive people among us who are communicating what is happening in the environment through their own bodies. Does that make sense?
Oh, completely. I'm one of those people that please don't make me walk down the fertilizer aisle or the laundry detergent aisle, because I will have a visceral reaction.
Yeah.
And I have my youngest son is Asperger's, and well, even my oldest, ADHD, both very sensitive kids to like touch and texture and all those things. And it's like, these things didn't exist 100 years ago. Maybe they did in a very, very small way, but
I mean, neurodivergence did. So neurodivergence, we have evidence for centuries that you have neurodivergent people, including autism, ADHD, for centuries. I think what's happened is that we're conflating the physical impact of environmental stuff on neurodivergent people and calling that autism or calling that Asperger's or calling that ADHD. So there are people who maybe are neurodivergent who are also having all these kind of comorbidities that we're then saying that's autism. And then we say autism has to be eliminated. Rather than, again, I think that with neurodivergent people, I think that there is in a sense, an evolutionary imperative playing out in our own genetic Homo sapien genetics, where you're seeing these people emerge with abilities like ADHD brains allow you to engage technology. There's a doctor in Texas who works with ADHD, and he postulates that you can't be above a certain IQ without having ADHD. Like the brain at a certain level of IQ needs ADHD to function. But then if autistic people, the sense of like honesty and care and justice that is rampant in the autism community, you have these people that are able to hyper focus on special interests that solve problems and have an ability to create solutions that normal brains don't have an ability to create. So if we separate out the neurodivergence from the comorbidities and just look at what's happening, to me, it's like nature responding in our species, trying to get more sensitive, more caring, more just, more honest qualities into our species to influence the way that we make choices with our future. you know. Whatever you think of Greta Thunberg, like look at this autistic person who's like, her special interest is the environment. And like when you have somebody who has a special interest ability that is so beyond what a neurotypical person can muster, it's like that's what our world needs right now. So I just think looking at things through anything that we're noticing. I'm going to tangent a little bit here, if I may. I'm
No,
just
no, please.
okay.
I love it because
Okay.
I've been trying to figure this out for years.
Yeah. So back in the Victorian era, two things happened that became very popular in society. One was statistics. Victorians became fascinated by statistics, and the other was eugenics. They became fascinated by eugenics. And when you combine a statistical lens with a eugenics lens, oh, like disastrous things begin to happen. So the bell curve, everything was like, oh, let's look at the bell curve and statistical norms. And what they started to do through a eugenics lens, using the tool of statistics, is to say the majority of people statistically fall into this section of the bell curve. The outliers are the people that we prefer outliers, that will maybe sponsor to do their art or do their astronomy or do their maths or whatever it is, are over here. The majority of all of the other people who are not statistically normal, we're going to put on this side. So this includes, like people with dwarfism. It includes people with certain mental illnesses. It includes people with certain types of genius. It includes certain people who are artistic. It includes criminals. They all get lumped in the same category and treated abhorrently. But this idea wasn't, with eugenics, it wasn't like, let's breed really superior humans. It was, let's favor this statistical norm. And then that begins to bleed into things like our medicine. So when a doctor tells you everything's normal, we now conflate normal with healthy and good, rather than understanding biochemical individuality. And, so like you might be low end of normal, doesn't mean that you're healthy. It means that you aren't showing any measurable disease that we feel like we need to treat. But you can be suffering, you can be tired, you can be in pain, you can be getting headaches, your quality of life can be massively disrupted, and you'll fall through the cracks of the medical community because normal has come to mean preferred, right? Mm-hmm. So as long as you're normal, it's good. And so we do that with each other. Like anything that's not normal, we are living in this idea of like, I need to have an aversion to it. So you have these brilliant, and I don't mean intellectually sophisticated, intelligent, I mean brilliant arisings from this deeper intelligence, this ecosystemic response that you can find in Down syndrome. Like many Down syndrome people are very affectionate, they're very caring. In a cold-hearted, hyper-intellectual Western culture, what a beautiful, necessary energy. We have people that are not paying attention. You have these people who hyper-focus in ADHD and autistic neurotypes, right? I mean, you're just seeing this, like for me, I look at all of this and I see all of these outliers as this powerful, beautiful, deeper intelligence response to what the statistically normal people have been creating. It's an abomination to try and stay statistically normal and to judge, and there's no intelligence there. There's this kind of holding and this prejudice, and you see all of these things in that statistically normal place that it's such a limited and harmful ideal, right? And I mean, look at eugenics is disgusting, but it carries over, and we're still kind of acting out this Victorian, and the Victorians, my God, we're still I mean, you're talking about British culture, the ultimate colonizers of the entire world is like, yay. And we're still using that model. It still influences our Western lens. And I think it's deeply problematic, and we're missing out on the deeper intelligence. And then we're also having a lot of neurodivergent people just get massively blasted by how imbalanced the culture is. So their sensitivities and what they could be contributing, even if it's not like a work contribution, just their existence, that requires people around them to become more tuned in to listening. You have to listen differently. You have to pay attention. You have to care differently. It makes everybody who's gone kind of numb, because we love, hopefully, we love the person who's born with these neurodivergences. We love them, and it forces us to seek life out in different ways and listen in different ways and care in different ways that kind of serves to crack us open and make us more aware. It's like, how can you think that that's a bad thing? How can we not treat these people as sacred? It's just so bizarre to me. Like, and then continue to pollute their environments and overstimulate them and assault them with sensory issues and put them in places where they can't have their systems calm down and just be what they are in this world, be the gifts that they are in this world, you know? And I'm not trying to say this is like, you know, inspiration porn. That, have you heard that term in the disability community, inspiration porn?
No, I have not. Wow.
Yeah, inspiration porn is like somebody who has a disability because they're socially disabled, meaning the culture is not, society is not designed for them, so it makes their lives hard. And then they do really basic things and everyone's like, look at you go, instead of going, wow, we've made that very hard for you. Like, maybe we should make this the world more accessible for everyone, but the statistical norm won't let us. It's like, of course, shelves are 6 feet tall in grocery stores. And if you're in a wheelchair, you can't reach, or you have a body that won't do that, your life is harder. And it's like, we'll film you doing it and we'll be so inspired that you managed to get something off the top shelf. It's amazing. It's like that kind of stuff. It's disgusting. So I'm not saying this from the lens of like, oh my God, it's so inspirational. These people, you know, I'm neurodivergent. It's like these neurodivergent people are so inspirational. I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying it very specifically from a very deep place of like deep listening, deep care, deep respect, and profound curiosity about what's happening here, rather than saying neurodivergent people are an aberration. Neurodivergent people are problematic. Neurodivergent people are sick. They're a sign that something's wrong. It's like, okay, perhaps they're a sign that something's wrong, but as a communication from the deeper intelligence to the rest of the world, rather than, again, it's you and you're broken, right? And you need to be fixed. I don't want to be fixed. You know, I know many neurodivergent people who have huge challenges in a fundamentally disabling culture who also don't want to be fixed. You know, I know a lot of differently abled people who don't want to be fixed. I think everybody wants other people to listen and stop being so focused on demonizing people who don't fall into this kind of bell curve normal area. You know, that's all.
Wow.
And yeah, it's just like, okay. Anyway, that was my
No, that's so beautiful, because you really you shifted a lot of things for me in that little rant there. I loved it. It's so perfect.
Oh, thank you.
So perfect. Yeah, and watching my youngest go through all of the challenges and having to be the mama bear and take on the system for him constantly. It's just like,
yeah.
I wish I had this conversation a long time ago, because it would have shifted the way I fought for him.
Yeah. Well, we're all learning.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, that's one of the hardest things about awareness or learning something that you didn't know, is the remorse that can often come with that is very painful, especially as a mom. Oh my God, moms have, you know, it's the most ferocious love on the planet as a mom, and you guys just want to do the best things for your kids. And, you know, my mom is like that too. I'm like, bless your heart.
Now, this may sound like I'm trying to oversimplify it, but I'm not. And there's no one answer, I'm sure, but how do we change this? What's it going to take?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I think that I do think that leaning into nature, spending more time with nature, leaning into more relational practices. So working with our ancestors, learning how to be in right relationship with the world around us, I think is very important. And I don't feel that what is happening is a problem that humans are going to solve. And I think this idea of like purpose and saving the world and all of these things that so many people, they're so good-hearted about their intention for it, again, really centers humans. And I think that that's a fundamental problem in our thinking, is to center ourselves so much of like, we broke it, we have the responsibility to fix it, and we can and we should, and we're not seeking outside intelligence because there's this invisible assumption guiding us, which is that we're the most intelligent. Right? And I think that that's flawed. And so one of the things I talk about in my book is recommending an evidence journal. I do this with all of my clients. So an evidence journal is when you have any kind of an experience that appears to be relational, it appears to have synchronicity, it appears to have an intelligence, it appears to be like, that was just right, or that was just what I needed, or I can't believe that that happened, or like that was a miracle, or whoa, that was so bizarre. We track these things in an evidence journal because what happens is we don't remember all of those moments. And our neurobiology, if you look at the way that neurons develop and are structured, we all have these kind of neurological superhighways in our heads that have us thinking in terms of hyperindependence, and all of our cultural norms. All of us are conditioned to it. I don't care who I am, everybody is. We have these neurological superhighways that are hyper-rationalistic, full of scientism, very impersonal, and very hyper-independent, right? And so keeping an evidence journal begins to collect undeniable experiences. And you're not saying, I feel this way. You're just saying factually, this is what happened. So that the more relational, ecosystemic, deeper intelligence begins to get substantiated in our physical brains. We begin to develop actual neurological pathways for ecosystemic thoughts and experiences, right? And so when the energy arises in our body about how we're going to think about something, we then begin to have like, there's a little footpath through the grass in our brain. And now it's like, now that there's no grass and it's a very clear dirt pathway, and now it's been paved over, and now it's like a road, and now it's, so that it becomes an equivalent neurological option, that when that energy comes up about how we think about, for example, my neighbor is sick, my best friend is sick, whatever, it comes up and we go, ooh, eco-relational. So we come into a place where we begin to get more and more and more informed, where our sense of self is, I exist and I am smart and wise and I function well because things are guiding and teaching me, right? Because I'm listening to the world around me and it's nudging me and informing me and helping me, rather than I know all, I do all, I think all, I should whatever all, I'm at the top of all, I'm the most, I'm this, I'm that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's becoming more intuitively aware than thinking aware. Is that what you're saying, or did I get that?
I think it's becoming becoming more embodied.
Feeling it.
Yeah, just because our bodies are the ecosystem. Like our bodies are the ecosystem. It's just paying attention and learning how to first even notice, and then second, kind of interpret what our bodies are saying, and then third, having the courage to act on it, because society says don't do that. That's bad, or it's goofy, or something could happen to you, or you might not get the safety that you're benefiting from. You might not get all the benefits of this field of denial goodness if you deviate from the way that we do things here. So it takes a lot of, I think, courage and maturity and genuine dedication and devotion to that deeper intelligence. And it's hard to be devoted to something that you aren't sure exists. That's why the evidence journal gives you lots and lots and lots of proof that it actually exists, and it actually is there, and it actually works, because it's invisible. It's the unseen realm, Does that make sense?
That. Yeah, it does. And it dovetails nicely into the four paths that you talk about in your book. I don't know. I thought I dog-eared that page. Yeah. It probably won't be seen very well, but you talk about these four paths. What is this? Does everybody fall into one of these paths, or
okay?
Talk a little bit
Yeah. So this is very specifically when you are on an initiatory path that is guided by this deeper intelligence it's a being that I call the Dragon Mother. The serpent form of this ancient being is the kind of earliest known or earliest understood human construct of it. Like we can't understand what it is, but we can know that it's there. And all things, I call it the Dragon Mother. Spirits aren't gendered, but that quality of mother is as the life giver, right? So in some cultural myths, it's the serpent, and in other cultural myths, the serpent is her partner, and she's unknowable. And so she creates this great serpent, and then they couple and they create the rest of the world, kind of a thing, right? It's just ways for us to sort of conceptualize this energy. I don't see it as a human. It's very ancient and it's very primal for me. My whole life, snakes have been teachers for me. I love them dearly, and it just makes sense for me. The Dragon Mother. Dragons are there's this kind of mythical serpent element to it to sort of help us not be so overly literal and intellectual about it. It has a very primal kind of hit to us. So those of us that belong to this being, those of us that were born to be her hands and hearts in the world, right? Those of us who do her work, that's specifically what these 4 paths are relevant to. Okay, so that's the context. So yeah, so people who walk one of these paths, it doesn't automatically mean that they belong to her. It doesn't mean that they don't. I'm not a gatekeeper for that. So that's up to each person to decide. So the 4 paths, they're basically, you need to cultivate competencies in all 4 paths to get to a place of wholeness in relationship with her and in relationship with the spirit realm. Some of us have proclivities, like some of us are more one path than the other, but even people who are just one path still will be required to develop in the other paths in order to fully go through proper initiation and come to a place of wholeness, if that makes sense. Are you tracking me so far?
Yeah. When you say initiation, what like do you have an example?
I could tell you what I mean by initiation.
Okay.
So initiation in this sense is being pulled out of the constructed reality and being pulled into relationship with what is. That's initiation. And we are so, any human society, any human culture anywhere creates its own culture, its own mores, its own little taboos, all of its own little things. And I don't care how civilized or not civilized it is. We all have this like need for safety and security, and we create rules about how to have that happen, right? So any initiatory process, even in a tiny indigenous culture, somewhere before there was modern civilization, would have its own group kinds of things. And somebody in that group is going to be selected or called as an emissary for the deeper intelligence so that they can go out and hear those things, go out in nature, get taught by spirits, and bring that wisdom back to the group so that the group can benefit, so that the group can live with more wisdom and more connection and more belonging, right? So the initiatory process in modern culture, however, modern Western culture has gotten, we're in such an extreme bubble. We behave in such unnatural ways. We're so out of alignment with what is natural that the initiatory process of getting pulled from that and getting sufficiently transformed so that there's less of the individual self and more of the ecosystemic kind of multiplicity that we are, right, exists. That's brutal. It's brutal, not because the process itself is fundamentally brutal, but because the process itself in the context of modern society is brutal, right? So that's why I call it savage awakening. It's savage because you're connecting with this primal intelligence, but it's also savage because what you have to go through just to get to any kind of place that you can even hear what's this deeper intelligence is just, it's brutal,
Yes.
it's, yeah. So you have some recognition there. It's brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the four paths are different ways that we will encounter the initiatory energy and different things that will be required of us. So if you recall, I said we're sort of emissaries, like the hearts and hands of this deeper intelligence in the world. So as hearts and hands, we have roles to play. So the black path is the spirit worker. The black path is the person who is the sorcerer, who knows how to connect with ancestors and does. They're the person who works with nature spirits. They are the necromancers. They're the weirdos. They're the red and the black are the two most maligned. So the black path people tend to be like, we tend to go, oh, you're spooky. So that's the witch, somebody who has become witched, meaning they have been transformed into a very strange creature who isn't just human anymore, and they have access and can hear and interact with the unseen realm. That's the black path. All of us are born to the black path. We all come from the spirit realm and wind up here, right?
Yep.
So that's the black path. The red path is the path of the artist and the lover. Red path people tend to have an abundance of energy. They tend to be very sensual. So as little kids, adults often sexualize them, of like, your kid's too sexual, because they're always like touching and just being like really yummy. And we go, oh, but they're not being sexual. They're children. They're just very in their bodies. So red path people usually start off like dancing and moving and having just tons of energy and lots of love and all of this stuff. And they want to do art and they want to sing and they want to dance. And then as they mature, they might go down a path of more like sacred prostitute, where they kind of have this way where they're bringing healing to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to receive healing. So they wind up getting into sexual relationships with people. They get sort of blinded to who that person is because this energy rises up in them and is connecting with that person through them. And they have their experience. The other person is like, wow, my life has changed. They go on to get married or go on to have very successful careers. The red path person then has to heal and recuperate. And then they get drawn to another person, and they just sort of go from person to person, creating these profound healing experiences through intimate relationship, where that other person otherwise would not be able to get healing. Mm-hmm. And so part of the red path is to create discernment and boundaries for yourself. So some red path people love that type of service. They love that path. And other red path people feel like they get drained by it. Right. So it's just setting up boundaries for, I think true red path people actually find it constantly energizing and beautiful. Those of us who are just passing through the red path, right, go, oh yeah, I don't really want to do that anymore. I want something for myself. So, and then the green path is the path of the healer. And it's really going through a progression. You know, any path that you're on, you're going to encounter people that are in need of healing. And it's learning how to sit with people in a way that is as a healer, where you have capacity, you have gentleness, you have truth-telling ability. If you have healing skills like energy work or acupuncture or something like that, that's great. But really growing your ability to sit with people in places that no one else can sit with them in. And it's not, you know, eventually as a healer, you get to the point where you understand it's not that you cure the person. It's that healing is just having the capacity for what their life is and the atrocities that they've been through and the very real, you know, death experiences or what they're facing that modern society is like acts like isn't even happening. To just sit with them in that, that's very healing for people, right? So everybody has to kind of learn how to do that on this path. You've got to have capacity, and it doesn't have to be humans. It's just being able to be with any being in its suffering and not turn away because you're too overwhelmed, or you can't handle it, or it's too gross, or it's too brutal, or it's too whatever, that we can simply show up for that and be present to it in a way that's just very like, you matter, and I'm going to sit here in it with you, right? And then the white path is the path of the Hierophant, or it's the teacher, but it's you go through your initiatory processes to go through where the teaching goes from like transmitting knowledge or skill to learning how, like, what people actually need, how they need space held for them to learn, to create space for learning, which is also healing, to actually being a transmission. Like, so you just become a Hierophant where you're directly transmitting. You're kind of translating these deeper esoteric principles into modern human parlance so that people can access an intelligence that by themselves they couldn't access. So the white path is ultimately the path of the Hierophant, of the person who's giving that transmission. So these paths are for people to have some kind of an orientation and a framework, and also to allow for some fluidity, because our culture is like, what do you want to be when you grow up, with this idea that there's some unchanging like choice. Like you've recently been like, I'm an artist now, right? Like we're this path, we're called to be transformed. So we never know where we're going. We just need to participate in the pull and not be attached to where it takes us. And you'll find, if you're really on this path, that you're always going through one of these four paths. You can always see it's one of those. And I have a red path client who absolutely 100% the red path person her whole life. She teaches red path work. She was required to learn black path stuff, and it deepened her red path. She was required to learn green path stuff, and it deepened her red path. She was required to learn white path stuff because it's now time for her to teach, right? But she's anchored in the red path. So it's not these neat, clean categories. It's understanding that this is a picture of wholeness, of what will be expected of you, but how that unfolds for each of us is different. Like I've been through I was very red path, but it's not my path. I'm definitely white path, but my whole life has been green. But I've been required to learn and gain really good competency in the black path stuff in order for me to actually deepen in my other expressions, right? So we're all, does that answer?
Yeah. And I like how it's a circle, because you're going to constantly shift and move and evolve through all of them.
Who's that?
This is Mulder. Have you heard him crying the whole time?
Hi, chicken. Hi, baby.
He's always has to be a part of all the shows, so.
Cats are amazing.
Yeah, he's definitely, he's special for sure.
Yeah, he's gorgeous.
Since I just got the book and I opened it up to the very beginning, I was very interested in the word weird that you used it. And that had to look it up. And then I find out that it is fate personified. And then it also referred to the three weird sisters from Macbeth. And I'm like, wow, how did that come to be? Because I'm sure there's an interesting story for you behind that.
That's a great question. Yeah. So how did that come to be? I actually, so when growing up, I didn't have access to anything other than Christian culture. My family came here in 1906 from Norway, and I don't speak a word of, I can say Ishtapudi, but I don't speak any Norwegian. My mom doesn't speak Norwegian. My grandma spoke some Norwegian, but my great grandma was fluent. And I just think how bizarre, like, why didn't I learn Norwegian? Why don't I know a bunch of Norwegian culture? Like, what's going on? And I became curious about that. And when I was in therapy a couple of decades ago plus, I was really exploring, like, why am I so stoic? Why do I have some of these qualities? And then I read this thing. It's a national poem of Norway, and it was like reading my family's credo. It was so bizarre and just all these things. So I started getting more and more drawn into my ancestry, more and more curious about my ancestry. Like when I was younger, the first thing I was exposed to outside of Christianity was Hindu culture, because, yoga was gaining popularity. It was the Bay Area in California, like yoga and all things like chakras and all this stuff. So I dove into all that, and then I found Buddhism, and I dove into that, and I went and studied it in Nepal, and I did all this stuff. And it's like I didn't have in the culture, it wasn't available that there's a Germanic in the United States where I was. It wasn't like, oh, Germanic, like white people actually have indigenous roots. White people actually have indigenous wisdom. White people actually have culture, right? So I kept getting pulled, and I'd go to something, I go, is this it? Do you remember the Dr. Seuss book, Are You My Mother?
Yes.
That was me. Like I'd go to Hinduism, like, are you my mother? Like, no, I love you. I respect you. It's not mine. I go to, Buddhism. Are you my mother? Tibetan Buddhism. Are you my mother? Are you my mother? And I kept getting pulled until I finally came to some Scandinavian stuff. And I went, wow, this is really interesting. So I love history, and I started to just explore all of this stuff, and finding a lot of like, this worldview is like something I've never been able to put into words. This is making sense to me. So I dove in and I dove in. And I grew up with this idea of absolute freedom. You can do anything you put your mind to. You can create whatever life you want. The world's your oyster. There's no limits. It's just whatever you decide to do. And then I discovered this story. So I looked into the world tree called Yggdrasil, the Germanic Scandinavian world tree Yggdrasil, and all of the realms. But at the base of the tree are these three sisters, and how they weave fate. And then when somebody's coming into the world, they carve their name into the world tree, right? So one sister pulls the thread in, the other sister is like spinning and weaving the thread, and one sister cuts it when you die. And it's these sisters are doing these things. The oldest one is the one who sort of calls you in, and the youngest one is the one who cuts. And I thought, that's really interesting. What is this about? It's like, oh, the web of Wyrd. And our orlog, there's another word, orlog. So we don't know, they were oral traditions. We don't know exactly what those two words mean. Some people say Wyrd is actually orlog. Orlog is actually weird. I don't care. It's not, no one's, I'm just calling it weird. The word weird, W-E-I-R-D, is like, oh, you're a weird person, comes from weird. And it originally meant like, oh, you're kind of touched by the spirits. You're a fate worker. You're kind of a bizarre, one of those energy people, right? So I started learning about that. And when I encountered the concept of weird, and I began to really look at a lot of different takes on it, and then started reading a lot of the folklore, it just made sense to me that basically with weird, it's this idea, first of all, it's a huge web, and we have our little part of it, and weird is ever unfolding, meaning it's not like fates like in maybe Greek mythology where it's set in stone. It's constantly being woven, right? So I love that imagery of it's constantly being woven, and the choices we make influence the pattern it weaves into. So there's this, but the threads, like what you're weaving is according to a very set of variables. So it's based on the decisions your ancestors made. It's based on the people around you, and it's based on you. It's so ecosystemic. It's so not hyper independent, but it's also saying you're also bound. You have restrictions. You can make infinite choices with those variables, but you can't have anything happen to you outside of them. And I resonated with that so much because I've always wondered, like, I'm such an enthusiastic, like caring, smart person, but I've fallen through the cracks my whole life. I'm like, why? What is, like, there's something else going on here. Like, it's not about whatever I want to do. There's definitely fate. There's definitely something intervening and interacting with me. And as I started to turn more toward that and learn more about the weird, it just made sense in my body. And it is, like I said, so much more ecosystemic. So when I talk about weird, I think there's a humility that comes from, like, what is possible for you is decisions that everyone around you is making and decisions you're making, and you have a set of variables. And it helps us to not be like, I can have anything happen. You can really start to do detective work in your life of like, what are some of the themes that I've noticed in my life? Like, what are some themes? Like, I always seem to show up right when somebody's going through major transition. I help them, and then I never see them again. That's been happening since I was a kid. I'm like, that's interesting. That's my weird, right? Or, I've always like wanted to help. My mom used to sit me down and go, honey, if you help this person, they're just going to break your heart. And I'd go, I know, mommy, but if I don't help them, who will? And I always like this urge to help. That's always been there as part of my weird, right? So you can just see these patterns, and you start getting sort of a flavor of what variables you're formed by and what variables you can work within. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I'm waiting for you to put out a t-shirt, Sadee, that says "Find your weird." That would be so perfect.
Or let your weird find. Just let your
Yeah.
weird, like, really just let your weird.
Yeah, let your weird flag fly.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, do it. I'll buy one.
Okay, I love that.
So before we go, I
Okay.
because my my gift of ADD had me all over the place on here,
Yeah.
I'm sure. Give everybody a synopsis of what your book's about so they have some sort of idea
Yeah.
of what they're
So
going to get.
if you feel like you have fallen through the cracks, you have abnormally struggled, you can't find, you go from person to person trying to find help, trying to get assisted, and you think you find it, and then it just doesn't quite hit the spot. And you're still struggling in ways that are not really explainable. And it can be physical illness, it can be feeling very out of place. There's all kinds of things. It's possible that you are in a deep relationship with this deeper intelligence and you don't know it. If you have the urge to respond to life in ways that isn't just about your personal well-being and your personal meaning and satisfaction, that's kind of a clue. So this book is a map of that initiatory process so you can understand where you are and you can understand what's coming. And it's very much relational and ecosystemic. So I'm not teaching people frameworks that are going to make them more hyper independent. I'm teaching people frameworks that are going to help them live more intelligently and ecosystemically. And it's really like, here's the map, here's what to expect in each stage. It's not linear, and you can be in two very different places at the same exact time. So it's not like you were making some progression. But I explain the process so that it orients people in the initiatory process, because I think the biggest struggle people have when they are in an experience of spiritual initiation is they feel disoriented, they don't know what's happening, and it's terrifying. You can feel very lost, you can feel very alone, you can feel very much like you're just getting your butt kicked and there's no end in sight and you don't know what to do about it. And modern measures don't help. They don't help very much, if they help at all. So this book is like a user's manual for getting your butt kicked by unseen forces in this world that actually are just trying to get you out of a false reality into alignment with what is, so that you can help the world, at least, at the very least, by not harming it more. That you just get back into the circle of life, basically. And then what happens for each person from there is anyone's guess. And I really try to avoid terms like purpose, because I don't know that I think purpose is not very useful for most of us. And we're so driven, like, I have to find my purpose. And I think just belonging and just being a member of an ecosystem where moment to moment you are responding to what's needed is where the most meaning and the most rich life comes from. But very few people can even listen at that level to know to respond. It's like there's nothing more fulfilling than hearing a plant say it's thirsty and giving it some of your water. You're not changing the world, but you're participating in life. And I think most of us are very lonely and feel very isolated and don't know why. And when you participate in this way and you get more in alignment, you just start to feel settled. Your anxiety goes away. You belong. You feel happy. It feels meaningful. And you're making a difference, but you're not trying to make a difference. So it's this kind of effortless, beautiful magic experience. And I just want to help the very special people who are born to this path have an easier time of it. I'm wordy.
That could not be, no, that could not be more perfect, because I look back at the years I struggled. What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? And I was just wrought, this whole time. And then you get a lot of spiritual people get into this place where it's like, oh, well, I'm in the spiritual community now, I'm not participating in the world. And it's like, that doesn't make sense either. I mean, you're planted here to experience the here and now.
Absolutely.
That's why this whole fluidity thing of just listening and feeling of what's the nudge of where I need to go next is so perfect.
And it's so relaxing. Like, I don't have to figure it out or think about it. I just need to show up and listen, and life responds through me. Right. But there's a lot of kind of getting over yourself that has to happen. Like, you have to be sufficiently transformed where there's not much of you left, like much of you in a modern identity left, or else you can really struggle with what's happening, because it's not glamorous. It's not self-aggrandizing. It's not like you're special. It's not like you're going to make a bunch of money. You might, but it's not. It's like she works through us in ways for her purposes that we can't understand. So I even say in the book, like, if you're very tuned in and she's working through you, but she sends you to a chicken coop and wants you to just like really tend to the chickens there ecosystemically and be a good care person for them and like help those chickens out. They're probably very special chickens. And like that's a beautiful thing to do, and no one will ever hear about you. But
Yeah.
you will feel fulfilled and you will be blown away every single day by the beauty of that relational belonging, right? So the modern Western society likes the like sparkle and the glamour and the like, look over here and like I'm so magical and like I have power and all these things. And it's really like when you actually get real power, there's nothing left in you that wants to like explode it into the world in a fireworks show. You just feel really like I think it's just a state of being very receptive to how stunningly beautiful and brilliant life is, and just being in awe of that you even get to be a part of it, and like that being enough, and that being like that's actually what it's kind of about, and being able to do that. And I think a lot of modern illnesses and a lot of modern miseries and a lot of modern problems fall away from the people that are present in that way, if that makes sense.
Oh, all of it makes
Yeah,
beautiful
yay!
sense. I love it. I love so much of it. And before we go, tell people, because you're so much more than just this book. You help
Yeah.
people. Tell people a little bit about that, where they can find you, and I'll also put all your information below.
Oh, thank you. So I'm at thedragonmother.com, and I'm actually in the process of creating an online community for witches, healers, and other strange creatures to address all things human and more than human. So I'm transitioning out of my one-on-one sessions that I've been doing for decades into just creating more of an online safe place where people get the information that's really relevant to who and what they are, and not based in kind of modern human new agey stuff or modern human scientism, but really based in very ecosystemic perspectives. I love mapping and creating systems that, like, I have a whole thing on anxiety of like how to understand and address anxiety that's not psychological. And I love helping people from cells to soul. So everything I've been doing over the last 45 years of my life is going to be a repository to give people access to that without the capitalism gatekeeping. I don't want to charge more and more money. I want to have small amounts of money from a lot of people so I can live a decent life. I'm not a greedy person. I want to live a decent life. I want to work with people that are relational and feel more comfortable for me. I want to have a community where we can all kind of get away from the statistical norm and be in an ecosystemic reality that's very, as you say, grounded or earth-based, and magical, and tends to all of the facets of us. So whether we're going through initiation or we're just trying to keep our head above water in life. So I'm working on that. It's several months away from that happening, but I'm phasing out my one-on-one practice. And I teach courses and workshops, and I always offer them online so people can go and see my offerings. And ideally read the book before you engage with me at all. It'll just help save everybody a bunch of time and money. And yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Oh, Sadee, you are magical beyond belief. I'm so grateful to have you on today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me. I was very delighted. So this has been fun. I really like you a lot. This has been really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll say goodbye for now
Okay.
to everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.